Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle here, and I'm joined by Luke. Luke, thank you so much for being here. Luke did incredibly well in his HSC last year. He received an ATAR of 99.8, and that included a second rank in business studies, so second in the state with 99%, and I believe most of your other marks were all high 90s, so you did incredibly well there. Luke, thanks for being here, sharing your advice with everyone watching. You know, if you want to elaborate on that with a bit of an intro, tell us about how uni's going and how you've been since finishing the HSC.
Yeah. So, as I said, 99.8. I went to St. Augustine's on the Northern Beaches. I'm studying commerce and law now at Sydney. I actually did standard mathematics and then had to get into Sydney through a bridging course. That's an interesting process. It's one that not many people know about. In terms of, a lot of people think there's a blanket rule that you have to do advanced maths to get into Sydney, but I, over like January, I was doing a bridging course a couple of days a week where I just basically learnt advanced maths concepts that you'd need for commerce. Did a test late January, passed that and got accepted in the second offer round, I think. And yeah, I think the main part of, I guess, the success I had in the HSC, I was never the most academic student from years 7 to 10. I don't think I received an academic award till year 11. And I think the pandemic and the lockdown gave me the time where I wasn't playing sport. I didn't have to be somewhere 3 days a week in the afternoon. And all that energy I had, I was then more diverting that towards my study. And it combined with, I guess, a higher effort and greater work rate. But in general, I think I didn't expect the mark I got, and I was beyond shocked with what I ended up with.
Yeah, so it sounds like, kind of humble beginnings and then ramped up at the right time. Good to peak in year 11 and 12, and you don't want to leave it too late, so year 11 is the perfect time if you're going to make a conscious effort to apply yourself. But did you feel like you had the potential to pull a really big mark? Did you know that about yourself? I'm just interested to know, did you know you had that and were like, okay, time to use that potential, even if you were still shocked with your final mark?
Yeah. So I would probably attribute like my academics from year 7 to 10. I was always like, around there, maybe getting 80%, 85%. And I guess my effort levels probably weren't where they could have been. My brothers graduated, I had twin brothers, they graduated 4 years before me, went to St. Augustine's, and they got around mid-90s. And I learnt from them in terms of, the level of work you need to put in to be successful in the HSC. So I knew I had it in me. I think my goal at the start of year 12 was 98. And then I think maybe after the trials, I thought maybe I could get a low 99. And like I was absolutely shocked when I got the results that morning. I guess it did, the results coincided with an increase in workload. That's all I can really say. Especially in the HSC, a lot of it comes down to memorization, knowing your syllabus, especially in the subjects I did, more the content-heavy writing subjects. I definitely saw the more work I put in, the higher my results got. And that's so encouraging where you see like the tangible effects of your hard work, and that just encourages you to work harder.
Yeah, and tell us a bit more about what that hard work looked like.
For the first 6 months of the year, I was playing cricket and then rugby, so I had trainings 2 days a week. So on those days, training would usually be 4 till 6. I'd get home about 7, eat dinner. That night I'd probably study from 8 to 10:30. Like the biggest thing I had was I wanted to be organised. I'd have like something on my wall that would said what weeks my assessments were, when they were coming up, like the length of them, so how much effort they kind of required. There's some subjects where you might have an assignment which is just a take-home presentation or something. Also the progress I was making in each subject. And then the days that I wouldn't have training, which was 2 or 3 days a week, I'd get home about 4, start studying at 5, 2 hours, break at dinner, and then another 2 hours after dinner. Saturday was always sport all day. Sunday I'd usually sit at the desk from about 11 till 5, catching up on what I had to, making progress on assignments. The biggest thing for me was the difference I saw from the early years to year 12 was starting early, getting on top of things early. Even if it's just 30 minutes, start writing an intro for that business essay that's due in 2 weeks, right? If I started early, if I made progress, that kick-started, then the next day you're into it again, and then you keep following on. Rather than if you keep putting it off, it's such a large mountain to climb. But if you make those first steps early, you've got the momentum going, you're in the headspace, you're thinking about it, you're in class the next day learning about the content, and you're thinking, how can I apply this to the assessment that you've already started writing? But yeah, I'd say it's definitely the hours increased, but also I was using them more wisely. If it meant, I'd leave my phone downstairs, or I'd give it to someone else in the family and say, you take this for the next 2 hours and I don't want to see it. It was more like maybe sometimes in year 11, I would have been sitting at my desk for the same amount of time, but only 25% is actually productive study. In like those school holidays, like right before the HSC, I'd give my phone to someone in the morning and say like, I don't want to see this until this afternoon. It's just more about being really maximizing your time, because some people will think like they're sitting at their desk all day and that's so overwhelming to them. Or you could sit at your desk for 3 hours, remove all distractions, and you're going to get through the same amount of work, and then you've got time to go play your sport, to go for a run, to go to the gym, to the beach, whatever it is. So it was more about being a lot more efficient, and just the organisation and the structuring of my study helped so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to that motivation, where you were drawing motivation from, you talked about how your brothers had kind of set a precedent for you in terms of the hard work. You seem to also have, and this is just a reality. People who tend to go really well have this internal drive, have an internal motivation. But were there any other sources of motivation, leading up to assessments and exams, or just for the whole HSC in general, that kept you accountable, that kept you going?
There was this app, I forgot the name of it, but it was one where there was about a group of 7 of us. We were all in the same English class. What happened was you'd open the app, you'd press a button, and it would essentially lock you in that app, and you can't go out of the app, and it counts how long you were then studying for, right? If you go out of that app, then your study session cancels and you don't accumulate those hours. It was almost like a friendly competition, who's going to accumulate the most hours, and it continued.
Version.
Yeah, because everyone's competing, right?
Yeah.
So that's essence. A lot of it was just personal. Like I just really wanted to do the best I possibly could. Like it's probably a cliche, but I really just wanted to maximize the mark I could. Since you only have one chance at the HSC, it's 12 months where if you can put other things aside, if you can focus on it, and I just wanted to see what was the maximum of my potential, how far could I go, and what mark could I end up getting.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. And it sounds like from that, you weren't necessarily chasing like, I really want to do law and commerce. You were saying, hey, I want to just get the best mark I can.
I didn't think I'd get into it. So I had it as my number one preference just out of, which I think a lot of people do, it's just like, oh, it's there, right? Because then if you don't get it, you're going to get the second one will come through, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a much more pure way to approach rather than like chasing an outcome. Now, admittedly, you're chasing the best result you can get, but it's more of you're more chasing the satisfaction of knowing you did your best, which is a better way to do it.
It's a lot more sustainable, I thought. It's really just like personal driven. There was no like kind of external motivators. You're not motivated by a scholarship or an award or something. It was more personally just I really wanted to do as best as I possibly could.
Yeah, and having said that, like if you're watching this and that you don't have that internal drive, but you are motivated by something external, like I've heard of parents saying, "Hey, we'll give you a car if you get X mark." It's like whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. And I know like I would speak to other people and like they were set on doing an engineering degree at Sydney, and that was their motivation. And fair enough to them, that's how they worked. So the thing about the HSC is there's so many different approaches. Everyone approaches it differently. Because everyone's got individual circumstances.
Absolutely. It's all about what you value. So I guess the advice is, if you're resonating with what Luke's saying, then, set some goals for yourself incrementally that are based on just achieving, your potential. So maybe aim a little bit higher than what you think you're capable of. But for other people, if you're motivated by something external, create those accountability mechanisms. Just know what you value and really play into that and constantly come back to thinking about that. Like, I find the big driver for me, I was very similar. It's just like, hey, don't let yourself down. It's only 1 year, no regrets, right? For me, it was just don't regret not having gone all in. Again, not everyone will have that same approach, but that is quite powerful. And, you've got to constantly come back to it. If you're slacking off, hey, yes, give myself a break every now and then, but you don't want to regret this. It's all over in October or November, so you may as well go all in for it. Now, let's talk about some of the things you actually did with the way you approached each of those courses that you did so well at. I didn't mention at the start, but you came first in Mathematics Standard. Yeah. So that's incredible, and that does explain why maybe the bridging course was a little bit easier for you. But I was going to ask about that. How did you find the difficulty of that? Like, do you think anyone could do it who has a reasonable competency at maths? Or
Yeah. So I'll start with the rationale behind doing that was because I did advanced math all the way through to year 11 was to maximise my ATAR. I thought I would do standard math and try and maximise the mark I got in that subject, and it would help me more than doing advanced math and kind of struggling throughout the year. It also gave me more time to focus on other subjects because I didn't need to devote as much effort to standard math as I would advanced math. With the bridging course, they really help you out. It's just online modules that you do at your own time. They walk you through it, especially like an online uni course essentially. There's discussion forums. If you want to look online, there's online forums where they'll people help you out. People will talk you through what the exam's like. But the exam was just an open book exam, 45 marks or 50 marks. You had to get 70%.
Okay.
And really, it's just year 12 advanced content. And for me, it was like, I was able to do that content because that's all you had to focus on, really. You're not having to focus on English and stuff. So I had 4 weeks of just focusing on that maths. One thing I found really helpful is that the practice exam they give you is almost exactly similar to the actual exam, just with different numbers. So if you find solutions to all those questions, essentially the exam's just going to be those solutions and you're changing up the numbers. I definitely think most people will be able to do it. You get, I think, 3 attempts, and even if you don't pass in those 3 attempts, they make accommodations and they might give you a 4th one. So they want you in. Like the universities, they want to admit you. They want more students in their courses.
Yeah, that's great advice. Because I know there are a lot of people out there who probably think, should I do standard or advanced based on that? But if you feel like you're going to nail standard and you're going to struggle with advanced, but you need math advanced to do your course, then you can just take this path. Try and nail standard, but make sure you nail it. That's the caveat, right? Don't slack off because you think it's easy. I'm sure you still worked very hard at that. And then do the bridging course. Now, what were you spending the most time on out of all of your subjects? I think from what you've said, they were all 2-unit subjects. Yeah.
English was definitely the toughest, and it was probably the one I probably was the most, not nervous, but it was the one I definitely had the most priority on because it would have had the most impact on my ATAR whether I went well and on that subject. I was looking for any help I could. Online notes, online essays from past students, students who'd graduated the years prior at St. Augustine's. I'd asking them, hey, have you got anyone I could? Have you got notes? Have you got essays?
So super proactive for English.
Yeah, for English
especially.
Was definitely the most proactive. The least would have been standard maths because I just kind of understood the topics. It's something you come across. A lot of it's just like extending on what you learn in like year 9 and 10 and just extending on that. Like it's more difficult, but it's not
demanding in terms of the time you had to put in.
Yeah. The thing for a standard math paper was like, I think they give you 2.5 hours. I could do one in like an hour and a half. Business and legal probably took up still a lot of time, a lot of writing.
Because they're content heavy subjects.
And a lot of it's memorization, memorizing the syllabus, memorizing all your cases in legal.
Talk about how did you do that? What was your process for memorizing those subjects?
The biggest thing I did was I'd look at the syllabus and I would color code areas of the syllabus. I would green all the subjects where I knew the content, and I could basically write an essay or a short answer on that question. Yellow was kind of, it needs a little bit more work, and red was desperate, urgent, so like global financial, like the real difficult stuff. That's like what I need to revise. Because I think a trap I was finding myself into at the start of the year and almost all the way through to trials was maybe comfort studying, like, let's just do a bit of, marketing strategies, which you're already competent with.
Because you feel comfortable, it's easy, it's a bit more fun.
So it's like, I'm not really keen on studying now. I'm just going to do some multiple choice, right? But when I started color coding, it's like, this is urgent. You really need to revise finance. And that comes down to what I spoke about earlier with like using your time effectively, not spending 2 hours on something that you could do an exam on tomorrow, doing stuff that's really pressing and that you might find difficult. But once you get over that hurdle and once you know that content, then you can start applying in an exam setting. Then it reduces your nerves going into the exam. A big thing for me was trying to maximize the control I had over the process because it was such an uncertain year. Once I had got over that hurdle with that difficult section in business or PDH, then you felt so much more comfortable because there's not that part of you going to the exam where like, oh God, I hope they don't ask the finance question. Then you're like, whatever question they ask me, I'm going to be able to do it. So that was the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, that's great. Prepare for the worst case scenario, and that's a great way of doing it. Did you have a process of ordering your notes, or how did you memorize them as well? So how did you order? How did you memorize once you had those priorities in place?
So like a big thing that people, I'm not sure, I found people sometimes overlook is knowing every point on the syllabus and just being so sure of what every point is exactly, because you might get a question on marketing strategies, but if you're writing about influencers, like that's already a couple marks gone there. So I had a syllabus and I had all the dot points, but I removed all the actual strategies, for example, like pricing and product, etc. I'd fill out all the blank spots on the syllabus, and the ones that I didn't get right, I'd leave. Like if I didn't know it, I'd leave it. put it in red, and then go over those specific ones because they're the ones I didn't know. In terms of memorization, say I had an assessment which was an essay which you drafted home and then had to do at school. It's all good like preparing for that, but if you haven't memorized that or actually know your content, like it's all going to waste.
So you would always memorize all your essays for English as well? You memorized everything?
Not for English, I memorized my entire exam bar short answers. Business, I didn't because it's quite, it's a little different in terms of you're responding to like a case study or something. But say if I had to memorize for a specific assessment, it would be I'd break it all up into sentences, and I'd memorize sentence number 1, and then I'd memorize sentence number 2, and then go sentence 1 and 2. So I'd write it out, right? I used to memorize by writing. I find that's the easiest way. And now I'd memorize 3, and then I'd go through 1, 2, and 3 until I'd done an entire paragraph. And then because if you're memorizing like the first sentence and go all the way through, by the time you get to the end, you would have forgotten like all at the start.
Yeah, that's awesome. And let's talk about the English you said there. So you memorized the whole thing, craft of writing included, reflection, and let's be real about it. How much of it was tweaked as a percentage?
A lot. So what I memorized essentially was, so for an intro, so I have a 5-sentence intro where it's like 1 and 2 is related to the question, 3 and 4 sentences are related to like my text and the themes, so I'd remember those ones, and then I'd implement. I used to leave gaps in my thing, like insert on the day here. Same with my paragraphs. Like I'd remember the body of the paragraph and all my quotes and the analysis and everything like that. But the actual relating it back to the question or the statement, I'd do that on the day. Same with the craft of writing, dependent on, like I had almost the nucleus of my story memorized. Same with my reflection. Throughout and at the top and bottom, it's important throughout as well. I'd link back to the stimulus of the statement. Same with like in an essay, I'd know I'd have triggers in terms of like, this is where this content that you're writing about here in this paragraph, this is where you need to link back to the statement, or this is where you need to link back to the question. Like different, you wouldn't be able to get away with just memorizing an entire essay and dumping that, as you know, right?
But the important thing what you're saying is you actually put the time into thinking about and preempting where you will have to address the question, and that became your priority on the day.
Yeah, definitely.
And you timed your essays in advance and made sure you had some room to move and some room to think about the question?
So timing, I used to focus so much on timing. So across all my subjects, so for every subject, I knew where I should be at the end of every section. So for business, for example, I knew at the end of my section 1 and 2, which is multi and short answer, it should only take me 45 minutes max. So if it took me 50 minutes, I know then in my business report, I might need to cut down on a conclusion. Or other way around, say if I knew I had to be finished with the business report by 2 hours, and if I finished in 1:50, then I knew, I can do an extra paragraph in my essay. And that actually happened on the day. I think my business report, I went about 5 minutes or 10 minutes too long. I noticed where I was, cut down my conclusion for that, and then kind of simplified my essay paragraphs as well. Same with English, I knew exactly where I should be. So I think I had more time with my creative writing because I memorized the bulk of it, but then I had more time to kind of relate it and tinker with it to link it back to the stimulus. One of the biggest priorities I had was knowing my timing and knowing where I was, because that gives you time, like then you know when to cut down, when you can add, how you're going to structure the rest of your response. It gives you confidence, like if you're ahead of schedule, it alerts you if you're behind. So then you're finishing each response. Say you run out of time with your story at the end and you don't actually have a conclusion to your story, like that's the top mark range, you might struggle to reach it.
I mean, this is all amazing advice. So worst case scenario, it's the preparation, knowing where you'd cut things out, what you'd add in, where to add things in to hit the question. It's just really practical, and these are the tried and true methods, aren't they?
Yeah.
Did people tell you about these approaches, or was this intuitive to you?
It was more intuitive. I remember I watched a couple Ignite videos on, I think it was for English, about like where you can cut out if you're running behind time, like cutting from your conclusion and your linking sentences and stuff like that, which I did apply like when I was preparing. The bulk of it was more intuitive and
just made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if you're in that mindset where you really do want to do well, then you actually try to think about, okay, well, what are the strategies I need to take? And then it will naturally come to you. Yeah. The thing is, with a lot of students, they don't actually give themselves the time to think about what are the practical steps that I need to take to ensure I'm ready for any scenario, worst case. Look at all the different types of questions.
And when I do that, and when you prepare, and say in business where I'd cover all my areas and make sure I'd turned all those reds to greens, then when you walk into exam, it gives you so much more confidence because you know, like whatever they're going to ask, you're going to be comfortable with. So that night before, when a lot of people are stressing, they're wasting mental energy, wondering about, oh, I hope this isn't in the test, or they're worrying about it, you're a lot more calm. You're more assured of yourself when you walk into the exam across all your subjects because you know your timing, you know you can get it out in 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever, however long the exam is. You're not worrying about a certain question, you're confident. And like I think that's a big part of the HSC, being confident, being assured of yourself. It's a stressful experience in general.
No, absolutely. And let's just go into a few of the subjects that you've done. And like, if people are watching this and they're saying, okay, well, what are your most practical tips for, business studies, short answers? Like, how do I approach those? How do I make sure I'm always getting full marks in that? You've talked about how to study for it. What about like the practical tips for writing the answers?
Okay, so the short answers, the biggest thing I got this from my teacher. So with short answers, so after my reading time, and I'd plan each one at the top of the page, like a couple dot points. Because then, when you get to the end of the short answers, right, and it's been 40 minutes, you're writing them all, rather than then looking at one, and you've probably forgotten what it was about, you've probably forgotten how you approached that question in reading time, you see those few dot points, and it's like a trigger, like, the strategies you'd write about, or the different points you're going to hit, so then you can go straight into writing. That saves a lot of time. Sitting, like wasted time in the exam where you're sitting staring, what am I going to write here? You're just straight into it. They'd say, all right, you can start writing in the exam. And I'd go through all the short answers, all 8 of them or whatever it was. And I'd plan each one. It'd probably take 3-4 minutes in total.
This is before multiple choice even?
Before I started the entire exam. Yeah. I'd planned each one with just my immediate thoughts, because you have great thoughts in reading time, like you're looking at the questions, you're thinking about it, and then you probably lose them if you leave them for another half an hour.
Amazing. And let's go to, let's go with the extended response. What's the best way to approach that and in the exam, let's say?
So with the business report, the biggest thing that I found was you need to link it to that specific business. So they give you a hypothetical business, and they ask you a few questions. You need to ensure you're linking it to that business. Like what my teacher told me and what I've heard from other markers is that students will get a 16 or a 15 or 16, 17 from talking about the content really well. They'll know the content about what the questions they're asking, and they'll apply it well. They'll talk about it well. But the 18, 19, 20 is taking the content, looking at the business, and really focusing on the business's demands, the business's requirements. Another thing I had is I wrote a lot of pages, not necessarily words, but I wrote a lot of pages. Let's say I wrote on the day, my extended response was 1,200 words, and it covered 20 pages. Now someone else might write 1,200 words, and theirs is only covering 10 pages, because I'm writing larger, 4 words a line, and someone else is writing smaller. It sounds trivial, but the marker opens up on their laptop, they'll open it up and it flags in the corner, large response over 15 pages, or there's a certain number, right? And then immediately they had that psychological effect of this student, he's wrote a lot, he's probably competent. So they're in a positive mind frame straight away. And also, like my handwriting, especially because you're trying to get out as much as you can in those 3 hours. You're writing fast, your handwriting gets messy, especially with the extended response. That's in the last hour, the last hour and a half. Your hand's tired, sore. It's not as easier to read for the marker. If it's larger, more spaced out, they can easily read through it rather than having to squint at the page for a small word and see what it is. As a marker who's going through 15, 20 responses in 2 hours, they don't want to, and they get paid per the paper, not by the hour. So they want to get through as many as they can.
Amazing advice. See, these are the practical gems that people really need to understand. But I have heard that before, and I heard that from someone else we had on who also got a state rank. So try and understand the trends here. This stuff works. What about the other section that we haven't talked about? So that was the business report. Always make those links. Just the essay or the extended response.
So same thing with the handwriting. That doesn't change. a big thing towards approaching the section is with the case study, for example. So some schools either get given a blanket case study, which they use for every single section of the whole syllabus. Other schools like St. Augustine's, we didn't get a case study. We were kind of tasked with going out and finding our own. A lot of people freak out about that, or they struggle to find stuff because some of the strategies are quite niche. There's not a whole lot of information out there on the internet. You can make up or certain parts of your case study to suit your theory, because all the case study is aimed to be is a real life demonstration of the theory that you've just been talking about. And the marker, who once again they're going through 10 responses per hour, only spending 5 minutes on it, they're not looking up whether Apple's market share was 40% or 20%, or they're not looking up whether Apple really used a differentiation strategy with their product. They just want to know that you're using the terms and and what your case study is relevant to the theory you were trying to apply. They really want to see stats because they want to see a physical, like a tangible effect. If you're on the exam and you get a question which it might stump you, instead of worrying about, how am I going to fit my case study to this, that's wasted time. Really add in a point of how Apple's used it and how they've had a certain market share increase or
just say Apple.
Their profitability, whatever business you're comfortable with using, but the case study doesn't have to be 100% authentic.
Yeah, it's funny you say that as well. It's almost like verbatim, again, what other people have said. And I think the point's coming through, which is a good point, that it's about applying something that could be the case. It doesn't matter that the number's not real, but you're showing that you know how to apply the correct number and the correct metric.
And you're showing how the effect of a price skimming strategy or the effect of an operation strategy. You're not necessarily because the marking criteria says a relevant case study or hypothetical example, because all they want to show is that you know how this theory, which you've learned about in a textbook, applies to a real world example. That's all they really want to know.
Let's move to the actual exam prep. When, before your HSC, before the trials, people are probably thinking, well, how long did you study for business studies, right, before it? So what were the kind of hours that you were putting in?
So I'd start maybe 9 o'clock and I'd go through to when I sleep about 10:30, but I'd have breaks in there. I'd have lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, I'd go have, a snack at 4 o'clock, afternoon tea. And then, I'd go down the road for a run, or I'd go to the gym or something, breaking up my days. So out of those 13 and a half hours, I'm probably only at my desk for about 8 of them.
Okay.
I'm probably spending about two hours of that on business.
Almost every day, or you would do it every second day?
So it does depend on the requirements. There might be a day where I want to do a full legal paper, and that's going to take 3 hours. It's probably going to take 3.5 by the time you sort it out and you formulate it all. So might eat into your business time. But then on the next day, you might do a full business paper, and then vice versa. But on average, probably 2 a day.
What that kind of says to me is you were kind of employing implicitly this Pareto method of choose the top 20% of activities that you could be doing that are going to yield you 80% of the return, right? And especially if you're low on time, well, what's the most valuable thing you could do, or the most valuable 20% of things you could do? It's probably just think about the core points I would make for this versus going through and writing the whole sentence. There's merit to doing that occasionally to get used to writing full answers, but really the marker's looking for those key points. Yeah. And if you've done those key points, in lots of 15 minutes instead of lots of 1 hour blocks, then that's going to be a lot more efficient and you'll do a lot more reps. So think about that.
And there are some students, probably all students, struggle with that initial walking into an unseen exam, looking at a question and trying to come up with an answer. If you do those 15, 20-minute practices where you're simply looking at a question, writing down your thoughts and formulating your arguments, whatever it is, if you just practice formulating a response to an unseen question, that's almost simulating that exam environment where you've got to come up with an answer really quickly, and that's going to improve your ability to do that on the day, and that might save you 10 minutes.
Yeah, look, well said. And I feel like we've got to get you back on to talk about every subject like this.
The other one with business was, and I talked about being in control of the process. I found a resource online which was every past business studies question sorted by syllabus point.
Oh,
so
smart.
similar, so when I'd look at my syllabus, right, and I talked about that color coding. So say if global financial strategies was red, okay, not only would I then go read about global financial strategies, but I have to apply that because otherwise I'm gonna lose that knowledge which I've just taken. So I'd go to my my document, find global financial strategies, and there would be a multi, a short answer, and an extended response, all on global financial strategies. I looked at trial papers. I made a list of every essay question I could find, sorted them by operations, marketing, finance, HR, and just put a list of the 4 paragraphs I would write in response to that question. And I think whatever the HSC question was, it would have come from that document, because it's that, there's only so many questions they can ask. And once again, it increases your confidence going into the exam. You feel like you're more in control, you're assured of yourself, you're less worried about what can they possibly ask, and you're across whatever they're going to ask.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like, the application of the knowledge is the most important thing in the whole process, right? Because that's active study versus passive study. Passive study is reading through notes, reading through the textbook. That's not going to help you as much as apply, do a practice question that forces you to consolidate what you've just read and actually put it in the context of a question.
Yeah, and then you look at the attached would be like the marking criteria. You check it off. Maybe there's still work to be done there, or maybe now you're feeling more confident there. But yeah, definitely that apply was so huge, because once again, like, it forced me to, as you said, passive and active. Like, for what I would just say, like, comfort areas and things I wasn't comfortable with. Like, instead of doing study of areas which I already know things about, it would force me to not only learn about the areas I wasn't sure of, but it exposed me to an exam question of that related to that content. So that reduces that fear factor where you're like, oh, I really don't want a global financial strategies question. But now you've already sat and you're forced to sit there and think about that in an exam style. Once again, reduces that fear. You're more confident. You feel more prepared.
That's awesome, man. And look, I think we'll wrap there. If that's okay, we're going to probably have to get you back on to cover more. So this has been amazing. Thank you so much. It's been awesome advice, so well said, and I'm sure everyone's taken 100 insights from this. But I think the key thing is that you've really reiterated time and time again is prepare early, be proactive, and apply your knowledge as much as you can. Right. So any parting words for the audience before we leave?
My advice would just be just start early. Make sure you're getting on top of things. As I said, take those first steps early. It kickstarts your momentum, and stay in control. Be prepared for all possible outcomes, and there's not much that can go wrong.
I love it. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the website if you need resources on these areas at jedl.com. So until next time, thanks so much.